On my daughter's wedding day, I gave her an envelope that should have changed everything. Instead of gratitude, she raised her glass and wished for another father. But when she finally opened my gift, her dream wedding turned into a nightmare. Because the truth inside that envelope was far more powerful than money. The day that should have been filled with joy began for me with the heaviness of doubt and the kind of nervous energy that only comes when your heart knows it doesn't belong in the room it's about to enter. For 35 years, I had told myself that fatherhood was about sacrifice, about giving everything you had, whether it was enough or not, because love wasn't measured in dollars or titles. It was measured in how many nights you stayed awake, fixing the broken dreams of your children, how many days you worked yourself raw so they could walk with their heads high. I believed that until the day my daughter Leticia looked me in the eyes and called me a failure. She had grown up in the house her mother Elena and I had filled with laughter, discipline, and hope, never once realizing that every toy she opened at Christmas came from the hours I bled into machines at the Ford plant, never once realizing that her college tuition was the result of my double shifts, missed meals, and old boots that should have been replaced years ago. When she landed her first job in marketing, moved into her shiny Bloomfield Hills townhouse with its glass walls and expensive furniture, I told myself it had all been worth it, that my worn hands and sagging shoulders had been the bricks beneath her tower of success. But then came the day she called me over, spread wedding magazines across her spotless coffee table, and began pointing out venues that looked more like palaces than places where two young people pledged their lives together. $45,000, she said, like she was ordering takeout. The flowers alone, she told me, would cost $8,000. The photographer another $5,000. The gown she wanted was $3,500. I told her quietly, ashamed even though I shouldn't have been, that I had $12,000 saved, every penny left from decades at the plant. After mortgage payments, Elena's medical bills, groceries, and taxes had taken their share. Her face transformed, excitement vanishing into disdain. $12,000? That's it? Other fathers take out loans, sell cars, refinance their houses. What are you willing to do for your daughter? The words stung worse than any wound I'd ever had, because they erased everything I thought I had given her. I had raised her alone after Elena's death. I had patched her scraped knees and taught her to drive, sat through nights of fever and days of exams. I had celebrated her victories and absorbed her failures like they were my own. And now, in the glow of her expensive living room, she looked at me as though I was nothing more than a roadblock to the life she believed she deserved. That night I drove home to my modest ranch house, the paint peeling, the gutters sagging, and sat in Elena's old reading chair, staring at the photographs of our daughter's milestones. Had I been fooling myself all these years, believing that love and sweat were enough? I asked the silence what Elena would do, and the silence answered with the thought that maybe I really was a failure, if the measure of fatherhood was how many zeros you could add to a check. So the next morning, I walked into Chase Bank, folder of documents in my hand, and sat across from a loan officer young enough to be my daughter's colleague. I asked for $45,000. She looked at my pension statement, my Social Security, my savings. She looked at my age, the maximum we can approve. She said with a neutral smile, is $35,000 at 18% interest. My heart raced as she showed me the numbers. $870 a month for 5 years. Half my pension gone, just like that. But I nodded. I signed, because I thought maybe if I could hand my daughter the full amount, maybe if I showed her I was still willing to move mountains, she would see me as more than the failure she called me. I left that bank with a cashier's check burning in my pocket, and when I added my savings, I had $47,000, more than she demanded. I drove straight to her house, rehearsing the joy on her face, the tearful hug, the thank you that would erase months of coldness. But when I handed her the envelope, her reaction was not joy. She looked at it like it was a napkin. "Dennis is paying for the whole wedding," she said flatly, naming her fiancé's wealthy father. "You can just return it. Just return it." As if my months of guilt and desperation, as if the hole I had dug in my future, could simply be undone. That night, humiliation weighed on me heavier than anything I had ever carried. I returned to the bank the next day, canceled the loan, and paid $500 in early repayment penalties for the privilege of having my love dismissed. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Weeks later, the invitation arrived, cream-colored, gold-lettered, elegant. It said the wedding would begin at 1 o'clock. I polished my black tie, the one I had worn to Elena's funeral and Leticia's graduation, and arrived just before 1, ready to stand tall, ready to be the proud father. But as I walked up the steps, I heard organ music, voices chanting vows. "You're late," a guest whispered. It started at noon. My hand shook as I pulled out my invitation. 1 o'clock, it read. I glanced at theirs. Noon. Mine had been changed, printed differently. Not a mistake, a choice. Through the stained glass window I saw Leticia walking down the aisle, not with me at her side, but with Dennis, the man who had replaced me. He held her hand, gave her away, sat in the seat that should have been mine. I froze on those stone steps, understanding that I hadn't been forgotten. I had been erased. The man who had worked, sacrificed, bled for her was gone, replaced by a man with a checkbook. I should have stormed in, but my legs carried me instead to a park bench across the street. And there, as the bells rang for vows I was never meant to witness, I touched the envelope in my jacket, the one I had prepared not with money, but with truth. Inside were 4 sheets of careful cursive, adoption papers, and a letter. For 35 years, I had kept a secret, one Elena and I had agreed to keep until Leticia was ready. She wasn't our blood. She had been a miracle offered to us when a 16-year-old girl lost her parents and couldn't keep her baby. We had chosen her. We had loved her by choice, not obligation. And now, as she replaced me with a stranger, I knew it was time she understood. The bells of St. Paul Church rang out as I sat across the street on a weathered park bench, the envelope heavy in my pocket, watching the stained glass windows tremble with music and vows that should have been mine to witness. Understanding now with chilling clarity that I had not been forgotten by accident, but deliberately erased from the moment that defined 35 years of my life. Replaced in my daughter's eyes by a man who could open his wallet wider than I could ever open my heart. And as the ceremony ended and guests streamed out into the sunlight, their faces glowing with the warmth of celebration, I remained still, my reflection in a passing limousine window showing me not the desperate father who had signed a loan at 18% interest just to prove his worth, but a man who was finished begging for respect from the child he had raised. A man ready to tell the truth at last. And when the crowd shifted toward the reception hall, the Renaissance Center with its towering glass and sweeping views of Detroit's skyline, I rose, brushed the dust from my jacket, and walked with calm determination. The envelope tucked like a secret blade at my side, ready to deliver a cut deeper than any insult my daughter had ever hurled at me. The reception was grand, the kind of place where the chandeliers sparkled like constellations, and the flowers filled the air with perfume that probably cost more than my mortgage had in a year. And as I entered, no one stopped me, no one questioned my place, because the label of father of the bride still clung to me in name even if it had been stripped away in spirit, and I carried myself with the dignity of a man who knew his worth, even if no one else in that room did. Leticia stood radiant in her gown, Marcus at her side, Dennis hovering like a proud patriarch, and guests moved in waves toward them, pressing congratulations, offering gifts wrapped in ribbons of gold and silver. Laughter rising and champagne flowing, as though love itself was being toasted in crystal glasses. Yet I saw none of it. Only the way my daughter's eyes flickered with surprise when she spotted me in the line of well-wishers, her smile forced into something polite, nervous perhaps, because she knew I should have been in that church, walking her down the aisle. But she had replaced me, and now here I was, standing anyway, a ghost among the living, holding out the envelope. "Dad," she said, her voice brittle with a mixture of relief and discomfort. "You came. I was worried when you weren't at the church. Must have been some printing error," she said too loudly, trying to save face in front of the watching eyes, her words skating on the surface of what we both knew was a lie. "Yes," I said evenly, handing her the envelope. "Just an error, I suppose. Congratulations to you both. This is my gift. It's very important." My tone must have unsettled her because she hesitated, actually looked at me for the first time in months, searching my eyes as if trying to decode the weight I placed on such ordinary paper. Before she could ask, Marcus took it gently, sliding it onto the gift table with all the others, unaware that it carried not wealth but revelation, a truth sharper than any jewel they would unwrap that evening. Dennis approached then, arm outstretched, playing the role of gracious host, his smile wide, his grip firm. "Finally we meet," he said warmly. "Letitia has told me so much about you. You must be proud." Proud, the word echoed like an insult in my chest, but I nodded, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Very proud," I answered, though the pride I carried was no longer for my daughter's choices but for the clarity that had finally come to me, the clarity that I would no longer be diminished, no longer erased quietly. Guests flowed around me, laughter and music filling the air, but my attention fixed on the envelope resting on that table, nestled among boxes from Tiffany's and envelopes fat with checks, waiting like a coiled snake, its bite inevitable. I took a champagne flute from a passing server, holding it steady as the photographer snapped pictures of smiling faces and glowing embraces, preserving forever the illusion of perfect love, perfect family, perfect unity. And I wondered if he would also capture the moment when illusion shattered. Then came the toast. Crystal chimed, the room silenced, and Letitia lifted her glass high, her face radiant in the light of chandeliers. "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible," she began, her voice confident, practiced. "Especially Dennis," her eyes locked on him, not me. "You've shown me what it means to have a father who truly cares. I've always wanted a different father, and finally, that dream has come true." Gasps rippled quietly, glasses frozen midair, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and for a breathless moment, the room was a mausoleum of stunned silence. She turned to Dennis, stepping into his arms, her smile dazzling. "Dennis, you're the father I never had. Thank you for showing me what real generosity looks like." He embraced her, triumphant, responding loudly enough for all to hear. "And you, Letitia, are the daughter I never had." Around us, discomfort spread like a contagion. Some clapped awkwardly, others whispered behind their hands, and more turned away, their faces pinched with second-hand shame. But I stood unmoving, my champagne steady, my expression calm, because I had expected nothing less, because this was the final nail, the undeniable proof of who she had become. I set the glass down quietly, turned, and walked toward the exit. No scene, no outburst, just a man removing himself with dignity from a place where love had been replaced by wealth, my footsteps echoing against the marble as I left her to her triumph, knowing full well that triumph was seconds from collapse. Because soon she would open that envelope. Soon, her perfect world would fracture. I returned home that evening to silence broken only by the phone ringing, again and again unanswered. The first voicemail chirped with her champagne-laced excitement. "Dad, we're opening gifts now. Some of these are amazing. Marcus's aunt gave us crystal from Ireland. Call me back when you can." The second came 10 minutes later, her tone sharpened by curiosity. "Dad, we found your envelope. What kind of gift needs to be opened privately?" The third was tighter, tinged with unease. "Dad, I read your letter. This isn't funny. This can't be true. Call me back immediately." By the fourth, panic had replaced pretense. "Dad, no. You're lying. You wouldn't keep this from me. Who am I? Who were they? This can't be real. Please, please call me." I sat in Elena's chair sipping the tea she once loved, listening to the desperate chorus of calls pile up, 20, 30, 50 missed calls, each one another crack in the castle of illusions my daughter had built around herself. She was adopted, the papers said. She was never my blood, but she had always been my choice. Her birth parents gone too soon in a car crash, a miracle phone call from social services offering a baby girl to the couple who could not conceive, Elena's tears of joy, my trembling hands cradling a child I swore to love with all my being. That was the truth I had placed in her manicured hands, and now she could no longer pretend that money defined love, because Dennis could never rewrite 35 years of fatherhood chosen freely. "You're not my real father." One voicemail cracked through tears. Then who am I? Where do I come from? But even in crisis, she failed to understand. Real fatherhood was never biology. Real fatherhood was love, sacrifice, devotion, The very thing she had thrown aside for a richer man. The calls grew frantic, her voice breaking, begging me to return, to explain, to undo what could not be undone. "Dad, I didn't mean what I said at the reception. Please, come back, I'll fix this, But the words dissolved into sobs, too late, far too late. By the time the sun set, I had unplugged the phone. I began to pack. Elena's wedding ring went into my shirt pocket, her photograph from Letitia's graduation slipped into my bag, my old tools polished and wrapped, ready to be carried into a future that no longer required me to grovel for crumbs of appreciation. Outside, my truck sat waiting, steady as it always had been, and I loaded it with the pieces of a life I was ready to reclaim. 53 missed calls blinked on the screen by the time I backed out of the driveway, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, no longer a tomb of unappreciated sacrifices, but the birthplace of my freedom. As the highway stretched out before me, Detroit's skyline fading into the distance, I whispered to Elena's picture on the dashboard, "I finally did it, love. I let go." Sinatra's My Way hummed on the radio, the road a ribbon of possibility leading to towns where no one knew my name, where I was not a failure, not an afterthought, not the man erased by wealth, but simply Dewey Gomez, 68 years old, still breathing, still free. The miles rolled beneath my tires as if the road itself was swallowing the weight of my past. Each town I passed, nothing more than a blurred reminder that the world was far larger than the narrow cage of humiliation my daughter had tried to trap me in, and with every mile marker I felt the grip of her words loosen, the echo of failure fading into the steady hum of the engine. Yet I knew, as surely as the sunrise, that while I was finding freedom, she was unraveling in the golden cage she had chosen for herself. Her wedding night, not one of pure joy but of confusion, questions, and the growing terror of truth, because by now she had opened the envelope again and again, her manicured fingers tracing the names of her birth parents, the dates of their deaths, the signature of the social worker who had placed her in my arms, and she had read my letter until the ink itself seemed to shout from the page, telling her that love had been her inheritance, not money, that she had been chosen when she could have been forgotten. And the more she read, the more she realized that the man she had publicly disowned was the only man who had ever truly been a father to her. But it was too late, because the words could not be unsaid. The glass could not be unraised. The crowd could not unhear her declaration that she had always wanted another father. And the cameras that had clicked in that ballroom had already frozen forever, the moment she replaced me with Dennis, sealing her cruelty in frames that would haunt her long after the flowers wilted and the champagne flutes were cleared away. I imagine her now, pacing her lavish townhouse in Bloomfield Hills, calling me with desperation, the phone ringing into silence, her pride collapsing under the weight of panic, Marcus watching with unease as she snapped at him, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't anyone tell me?" While Dennis, the man she had embraced as her dream father, shifted uncomfortably under the sudden knowledge that no amount of wealth could rewrite 35 years of chosen devotion. No check could erase the truth that biology had abandoned her, and only love had made her who she was. And in that uncomfortable silence, Letitia must have felt the cracks spreading through the perfect world she thought she had built, realizing that all the money in the world could not buy her a different past, could not buy her the gratitude she had squandered, could not buy back the father she had humiliated beyond repair. For my part, I did not hate her, not anymore, because hate is still a form of attachment, and I had cut the strings. I had folded the memories like old photographs, keeping only the ones where she had once been grateful, once whispered, "Thank you, Dad. I couldn't have done this without you." Keeping those in my pocket for nights when loneliness might try to sneak in. But the rest, the pain, the scorn, the betrayal, I left on that park bench outside St. Paul Church, where the man I used to be had died quietly as bells rang for a wedding I was never meant to attend. The road stretched on, and with every mile I thought not of what I had lost but of what I still had. Freedom, dignity, and the years ahead of me, perhaps 20, perhaps more, years that belonged not to Letitia's demands, but to myself, to mornings where I could sip coffee without waiting for the phone to ring with another plea for money, to evenings where I could walk without the shadow of expectation dragging at my heels, to nights where I could finally sleep without replaying her sharp words in my head. I imagined small towns where people still looked one another in the eye, where neighbors waved from porches, where a retired mechanic could find work fixing engines or teaching young boys how to hold a wrench, where gratitude was measured not in thousands of dollars, but in simple words like thank you. And I knew that was where I belonged now. Not in the glittering halls of Bloomfield Hills, but in the honest corners of America, where men like me had value beyond our bank accounts. Still, I could picture the aftermath I had left behind. Letitia staring at the adoption papers, her new husband asking questions she didn't know how to answer, her wealthy father-in-law realizing that the bride he had proudly claimed was not the legacy of a bloodline, but the legacy of a choice made by a poor man and his dying wife. A choice born of love rather than money. And I knew that shame would gnaw at her louder than any scolding I could deliver, because there is no mirror harsher than the truth. And she would be forced to see herself not as the perfect daughter who had ascended into wealth, but as the ungrateful child who had discarded the only man who had ever truly been hers. I could almost hear her voice cracking in desperation. "Dad, please, I didn't mean it. Please come back." But those words, even if spoken, could not bridge the canyon she had carved with her cruelty, because forgiveness cannot be begged when gratitude was never given in the first place, and I was done teaching lessons that should have been learned long ago. The highway carried me south as the sky burned orange and pink, Elena's favorite colors, and I spoke softly to her picture on the dashboard. "We did it, love. We gave her everything we could, and now we're free." And in that moment I felt not sorrow but peace, because revenge had not been a shout or a fight, but the quiet revelation of truth placed in her hands like a mirror, showing her not who I was, but who she was. And that truth was far heavier than any check I could have written. That night I stopped in a small town, the kind with a diner glowing neon in the dark, the kind where a man could sit at a counter and drink coffee without anyone asking for more than his name. And as I looked around, I realized that maybe the rest of my life was not a punishment, but a gift, a chance to live without begging for love, a chance to breathe without proving myself, a chance to finally walk my own road. Back in Bloomfield Hills, my daughter's story would become whispers among her friends, questions at parties, rumors that her father had abandoned her on her wedding day, rumors she would try to drown in wealth, but that would always rise again with the memory of that envelope, and I knew those whispers would sting more than anything I could ever say, because they would remind her, forever, that love cannot be bought, and gratitude cannot be forced, and that when you betray the hands that raised you, sometimes all you are left holding is the truth that burns. And so my story is not just one of betrayal, but of release, not just of revenge, but of renewal. And to anyone listening now, understand this. Love is not about the size of the check you can write. It is about the sacrifices made quietly in the shadows, sacrifices that deserve gratitude, not scorn. And when those sacrifices are dismissed, sometimes the only way left to speak is to let the truth do the talking. And now, my friends, if this story moved you, if it gripped your heart and made you feel the weight of love, betrayal, and truth, then I invite you to support Relative Revenge. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with others who value powerful stories, like it if it spoke to you, and comment below to tell us what you would have done in my place. Because every voice matters, every story matters, and together we will keep telling the truths that the world tries to bury.